Well, we've got a special guest tonight who's going to be talking about his experiences of taking images, video, and photography of things that have been sighted in the skies of Oxfordshire in particular, and that is Mr. Nik Hayes. So, Nick, welcome to our show.
Thank you, Neil. Thanks for inviting me onto the show. It's great to be on.
Thank you. And how was your Christmas and New Year, Nick, before we forget?
Just had a nice quiet one, to be quite honest with you. Just my sister and my niece and the two dogs, and that's about it, really. Nice and quiet. That's the way I like it.
Cool.
No pointing any cameras into the sky then, Nick?
No, well, I've got a bit of a problem with my infrared camera at the moment. It's not working since I had an experience in my room some weeks ago. So I'm still waiting for that to be repaired. Yeah, I've got... actually, it was a bit cold as well. I don't really like using my my camcorder when it's too cold, so I haven't really been doing much recently, no. I'm just waiting for the spring to come.
When you say experience, was this just a natural thing, or was it something on the etheric side?
It was a paranormal type thing. I've been having a few strange things happening over the last sort of year, and they sort of culminated in it looked like some kind of energy or a being that came into my room. The dog started barking at it and sort of backing into the corner and snarling, and I saw like a human-like sort of entity, and I tried to take a photograph with my infrared camera, and the camera just packed up and hasn't worked since.
So Nick, starting back from the beginning, could you tell us how you got into this kind of thing and what your sort of background is?
Yeah, well, for most of my life, I've been a musician. I originally lived in the Midlands, and I've been a singer in various bands. And I've always had a bit of an interest in UFOs, but what happened to me was that I went out for a walk with my dogs on Christmas evening 2008, and it was a very misty and cold night, and I basically stopped, but the dog wanted to go back up an alleyway we'd already gone down, so I decided to walk back up with him. He was only about 6 months old at the time, so I decided to let him have his way, and I noticed a pink glow coming from within the mist, and I carried on looking at this glow, and eventually I saw a flying saucer. Well, it was some kind of a craft. Well, I thought it was originally, but it was a UFO, and it was at quite low altitude, perhaps 200 feet. It looked like a child's spinning top, totally made of light. And it was from seeing this UFO that I started looking into the whole UFO thing a lot more, and I came across the work of Trevor James Constable, and from there I started getting infrared cameras and different things, to allow me to see into the invisible.
And who is Trevor James Constable, Nick?
Trevor James Constable was a world-renowned author and military historian. He served 30 years in the US Merchant Marine, and he suddenly got an interest in UFOs when he kept hearing reports about these objects appearing and then disappearing. And he wanted to know where they actually disappeared to. So he began his work in the Mojave Desert in 1957 with Dr. James Woods, a friend of his. And they started using a standard camera loaded with infrared film. And that's where they really began their work. And he pursued this work for many, many years until he ended up getting into weather engineering. He used Cloudbuster. Originally, he used the star exercise as an attraction method, but he went on to use a Reich Cloudbuster. And from there, he developed weather engineering. And he finally retired. I think he retired from ufology in the 1980s and just set up a weather engineering company based in Singapore.
But what prompted him to try infrared photography? Because most people, when they're thinking, I'm going to go out UFO spotting, they're just going to take out a camera at the very basics. So what made him think that there was something in the infrared that he should be looking at?
The thing for that was the way these UFOs disappeared, and he figured that they picked up on radar. There was a case called the Nansei Shoto, or the ghost of Nansei Shoto, which was during the Second World War, where a couple of hundred unidentified targets were picked up on radar, and they split into two columns above the US fleet, and they sent up pilots, and the pilots couldn't see anything, and nothing was ever seen, although they could be seen on the radar. So he decided to start looking in the invisible, and he realized that the infrared was probably the place to start. And he was also at the time hanging around with a guy called Franklin Thomas, who was a psychic, and Franklin Thomas suggested that there were things in the sky that were basically living creatures as well as craft-like objects.
Wow. So
that's interesting because these living creatures that I've seen videos of, these so-called space snakes, these kind of like weird white things that are kind of snake-like pulsating. You probably know the ones I'm talking about. And other kind of strange winged beings. Do you think that's what he was referring to?
Yeah, Yeah, I gather, but yeah, he did say. Oh, I mean, Hawley Franklin Thomas basically said that there were things up there which weren't craft, and he didn't really describe a lot of it. But when Trevor got his first set of photographs, he caught an amoeba-type invisible creature, and Franklin Thomas said to him, "Oh, you caught them then? You know, you managed to capture them," and he wasn't that surprised. So I think he was sort of more referring to these energy type, like the amoeba type creatures. Or perhaps I don't know. I don't know too much about Franklin Thomas, to be quite honest with you. But Trevor was actually after craft at the time. It was craft that he was very amazed when he actually got the amoeba pictures, because he wanted expecting a shiny disc of some sort.
So that inspired you to then try a similar kind of practice. I mean, did they give instructions in the book of what kind of cameras to get for this kind of thing?
No. Basically, what happened was I wrote to Trevor. I decided to write to him, and I told him that I was thinking of filming using a digital camera, even though he suggested, to film with a film camera and infrared film. But he wrote back to me and he said, you should try new approaches. Nothing wrong with trying new approaches. And he said, it'd be a good thing to do. But he describes methods. There's methods that he uses for attraction and detection in his book, Quest of the Invisibles. And obviously his first book was They Live in the Sky, his 1958 book, which covered his very early work in the Mojave Desert from 1957 through to 1958. And his later book, which was released in 1976, The Cosmic Pulse of Life, that covered his much later work, where he was mainly using a cloudbuster for attraction. And I actually built a cloudbuster to use for an attraction method. I started filming in actually early 2010 during that long winter that went on for a long time. And I started using a cloudbuster to try and bring anything in the invisible that much nearer to myself in order to be able to film it, more easily.
And what exactly is a cloudbuster?
The cloudbuster is it's a set of pipes, metal pipes, which are grounded in water, and invented by Dr. Wilhelm Reich. And he theorized that they would affect different densities of existence. And how he noticed was he saw some pipes sticking up from a pond. And he noticed there was three or four holes in the clouds, exactly above where these pipes were pointing. So he started mucking around with the pipes during his studies of etheric energy, and he was looking into orgone energy. And he found that they attracted UFOs. And it's theorized that it shoots into the ether a ray, and apparently when it's grounded in water, it takes the ether from the clouds back into the water. And this can bust clouds, get rid of clouds, and it can also attract creatures. And he found that he was seeing visible UFOs at the same time. And Trevor used this basically to replace the star exercise, which is what he used originally, which is it's an esoteric sort of procedure by which the whole body energy can be energized, and it creates a regular pattern of pulsations in the ether. And the theory is that it attracts creatures and craft and things, from other realities.
Nick, why do you think that these beings, or whatever they are, or sometimes craft, are visible on infrared but not visible to the naked eye?
I think it's because they're existing in a different dimension. I think that's possibly it. I think there's many different dimensions existing at the same time. Maybe sort of they're at a higher frequency, perhaps. I mean, I've filmed things in the infrared and the ultraviolet, and obviously, the ultraviolet's at one end of the visible light spectrum, beyond the violet, and you've got the infrared at the other end.
I was going to ask about the UV spectrum. Are you getting the same things in the UV spectrum as the IR spectrum?
No, I'm not actually. No. When I filmed in the infrared, I caught a lot of craft-like things, a lot of disc-shaped and bell-shaped sort of objects, and they seem to change shape, a lot of them. But they were very, very high in the sky. But I also captured some sort of creatures, these things that I call spinning jennies and plasmatic gliders. They seem to be sort of energy, almost like a liquid energy that that's invisible. There's those, and then when I film in the ultraviolet, I seem to get some very different things. I get a lot of actual fish-like forms and lots of very, very strange things, which it's very hard to put them into any kind of a. I was going to say they're just so very different. It's very hard to put them into groups. Really, I've been trying to sort of put them into different groups and similar ones, but obviously I'm only just I've only just broken into this. There's only a few things that I've captured over the years compared with the millions and millions of things that must be out there.
Is it? I mean, we're not going to confuse listeners by sort of thinking that if they got night vision cameras or night vision goggles, that they'll be able to see the same things, are they?
No, I don't use any night vision stuff at all. I film in the daytime. I
Right.
film in the infrared, and in the ultraviolet in the daytime. With the ultraviolet, I use the sun obliteration technique, and I zoom into the edge of a building, and basically I wait for things. I use a cloudbuster as an attraction method as well, but I just wait for things to come by. They seem to come by on a flow, almost like an etheric flow at high speed. Yeah, when I film in the infrared, I'm filming in sort of a totally different way. I tend to film high above the trees, exactly where the cloudbuster is pointing.
It's,
Go
it's
on.
interesting that you bring that up, Neil, because you guys probably saw this, but and you probably see this as very lowbrow, but I quite enjoyed it. Danny Dyer did a UFO thing that was quite interesting, where he was visiting different ranches, and he was actually using infrared cameras and
I
infrared
recall
night
this. Yeah,
vision
yeah.
as you know, the type of stuff you can get off eBay or you know, camera shops or whatever. And he was actually picking up stuff, and his group was actually picking up stuff that was in the infrared spectrum and quite visible on IR scopes, but not visible to the naked eye. So in fact, and I don't know if they're the same objects that Nick would be picking up on, but certainly I would say to people listening, give it a go, because you might actually be able to pick something up. Nick, what do you think about that?
I think the sky is full of living creatures. It's just like an ocean, as far as I'm concerned. And the thing is, what I've realised through my work is that when you really want to see something, very often you will. A lot of these things that I've been filming, I believe, because are actually, living entities as well, and they know when you're looking for them. And they will appear. I've always subconsciously sort of asked, is there anything out there that wants to appear? For my book, for instance, when I was writing the book, and very often things would appear. I'd take a couple of photographs at 10 thousandths of a second, take 3 or 4 photographs, and these things would appear just on one photograph. Um, so there is a whole load of things that are out there. I think that they can change their form. They can look like anything they want. There's a lot of people now doing summoning, and they're getting all sorts of forms coming forward, from humanoid sort of figures walking across the sky to balloon-like shapes, and some of them look like paper bags and things like that. They come down from the skies from very, very high, and they change and they flash back to you. A lot of people are doing this, and they seem to be intelligent, a lot of these things. And obviously there's craft as well, but it's worth just going out there and looking in the sky. The sky's full of things. It really is.
So it's basically a case of your intention to see them kind of like manifests them or brings them into a reality kind of thing.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, this is the thing. I mean, I always suspected it anyway, but to be quite honest with you, I've had some quite alarming things happen over the last year where I've been filming in the infrared. I use a Geiger counter, you see, as well,
Yeah.
and I've been filming just at night time. There's quite a few pictures on my website as a result of what I filmed at night time. I filmed things coming out from my cat's grave, my cat Roy, in total darkness. I film. And a lot of the time I was asking, is there anything there? Is there anything there? And very often, these things would just appear as if it was listening to what I was saying.
From my understanding, Nick, there seems to be a bit of a war between light and dark, and I go on about this quite a lot, but there seems to be kind of a group that wants to communicate with humans and to kind of expand our awareness and make us aware of these things. And then there's another group, a darker group, who wants to suppress all of this and keep people dumb and stupid. So my next question would be, when you started investigating this kind of thing and getting results, were you getting anything along the lines of either black helicopters or men in black or strange phone calls or things trying to put you off the scent, so to speak?
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, there's an incident. I had my camcorder seized. My last camcorder. Well, I had a camcorder disappear. Somebody came onto the land while I was filming
Wow.
and took the camcorder. And also I sent the camcorder off, and after about 2 or 3 weeks, I hadn't arrived at the company in America. So I had a look online, and said it was taken off at Kennedy Airport, and it was under inspection. And I noticed that same day black cars parked up the end of my road, and they were there for a good couple of months altogether, following me and my sister. And they were obviously looking into me, and I didn't get the camcorder back for a long time. And they must have been really interested in the fact that it was, quite an expensive full spectrum camcorder. this and that, and a few other things. So I still don't know whether it was because I was learning Arabic, because I did 5 years of Arabic, and there's all this sort of stuff going on. They're looking into everyone. I think they think anything's a threat, and I don't know whether it was that the angle they were coming on, not knowing where I was at with it and what I was going to use equipment for, or whether it was something to do with the ET thing. I really don't know, but it went on for a good couple of months, definitely.
My experience personally for myself, and indeed somebody who's very psychic, that I know very close to me, we've both had things try to put us off the psychic scent, etherically, i.e. kind of like unseen entities, and kind of like more in the material 3D world, i.e. black helicopters, strange phone calls, and odd things where we've had interactions with strange people trying to kind of screw our lives up, kind of thing. So it's almost like there's a two-pronged assault. There's like an etheric assault from unknown beings or unknown entities that try to screw up your life, and then there's kind of like the more the 3D man human type element that's also trying to screw up your life. And it sounds like you're getting a bit of both. Can you describe the incident you said recently where your camera failed, or there's a problem with your infrared camera? What happened with that?
Well, basically, that was a culmination of a lot of things that have been happening. The dogs have been reacting a lot upstairs. I live with my sister, but I live in a separate building, and I've got one of the dogs upstairs with me. Dogs have been getting really unnerved. It's been going on for about a year and a half. It's basically picked up since I buried my cat, Roy. Things started being moved in my room, and the computer would be switched off when I was writing my last book. And we had knockings on the door at 2 or 3 in the morning, and you can't even get into our property because it's gated and everything. I live actually on like a nature reserve type thing. It's quite a big property with a forest and an old riverbed running through it, and you have to go through electric gate to get in. But we've had the doorbells ringing and knocking at 2 or 3 in the morning. I've had all sorts of strange things coming, and basically it culminated with what I thought was an entity actually trying to come into this reality in the corner. And my dog Lucy, she's the nicest dog out. I've never seen her snarl or do anything, and she was down on all fours and she was snarling and spitting and backing off into the corner, and I saw something forming, and I actually had my camera around my neck, and the Geiger counter went off at the same time. My stereo went berserk, and that hasn't worked since, and my camera just stopped working. The whole screen went black, and it hasn't worked since. And that's an expensive camera. I've had that for 8 years and taken some of my best footage with that camera. But I've had a lot of stuff going on. A lot of stuff. I felt like somebody was in the room with me.
Yeah.
Ornaments have been turned upside down. I've had quite a few drones coming over the house as well.
Yeah. Nick, this is exactly what I'm talking about, because these entities coming in and being watched, that's on the etheric side, and I would probably guess they're probably human remote viewers seeing what you're up to. Now the drone thing, that's very 3D, that's very governmental kind of secret service thing, so they're in tandem. It's not a coincidence that these things are happening kind of at the same time, is it? They're in tandem, and that kind of suggests that there must be a branch or an arm of the government or the military that is very in cahoots with these unseen kind of dark beings. Would you say so?
Well, to be quite honest with you, I've been looking into the UFO thing for a long, long time, and I've come to the conclusion now that there aren't aliens from other planets. I don't believe they're from other planets. I believe they're interdimensional beings. I believe they're the same beings that are referred to in the Book of Enoch. I believe they're the same beings that have presented themselves as the gods of Egypt and the gods of Mesopotamia. That's why I'm really starting to believe. I think the whole extraterrestrial thing is some kind of a smokescreen for what's really going on.
It could be. You have a similar belief, don't you, Neil?
Yeah, it's because of Andy and I both have backgrounds in mediumship and spiritualism and seances and that kind of thing. So we kind of straddle kind of two worlds to a certain extent. But my kind of where I'm at is that I think there's probably other life on other planets out there, and they perhaps can get here. But I think they do have the advanced spiritual knowledge to able to materialize. I mean, there's been accounts where people have been abducted by the Greys, if you want to call them the Greys, and they'd literally been pulled through windows that are solid, but somehow they've dematerialized. Now, dematerialization happens quite frequently in physical seances, normally conducted in the dark, and again they will use infrared vision of sorts to try and see what's happening, or infrared lights to try and light the room up to a certain extent. But they say this phenomenon is generally kind of sensitive to normal daylight of that spectrum, and maybe that might account for perhaps why people tend to be abducted when they're asleep or at night, because the daylight hours are not conducive, perhaps, to a particular breed, or, if you like, species of creatures, aliens or whatever, to abduct you. And the nighttime is a much better, for physics, that is, to kind of dematerialize you or something. But there's possibly other. I think I agree also that there is other beings possibly out there that will kind of infiltrate our reality, and they can show up perhaps on the infrared, or ultraviolet, or whatever you want to call it. They're beyond the range of our physical senses, and I think Nick is one of the maybe pioneers, if you like, that's at least kind of opening our eyes to these things.
Yeah, well, the thing is, I mean, I had my experience with entities. I'd never filmed any entities as such before, but what happened was, after I buried my cat Roy, I took some photographs of his gravesite, and a couple of strange things came out from that. And as a result, I started walking around the garden, and I kept getting a massive Geiger counter hit every time I walked past the greenhouse. So I took a photograph, and basically there was an entity in the photograph, and I went on to take 4 more photographs. Now, the first entity looked like a Napoleonic type figure. And when the Geiger counter went off the next time, a couple of weeks later, I made the comment out loud, I don't really feel comfortable filming ghosts. I don't see myself as a ghost hunter. I feel more comfortable with an ET. And I took a photograph, and there's an ET-like being. I think I sent those photographs through to Neil the other night. But basically, I think the next one that came along was a really horrible-looking thing. It looked like it had horns. It was like a black sort of entity, and it looked like it had a cat or a horned being sitting on its lap, and in the background there was 2 snarling white faces. And then I filmed another one. These are all a couple of weeks apart, but I got a huge Geiger counter hit. And what I did, I filmed the infrared camera straight into with a flash on, straight into the actual greenhouse. And what it is, because it's got a 720 nanometer infrared filter on it, it lets a tiny bit of the visible light in, but only a tiny bit of the red spectrum. But that seemed to be enough to light up the greenhouse and make these beings visible.
Sorry, cut off.
So you think, Nick, that these beings are always around us, or did you kind of, because you put out the feeling that you wanted to see aliens as such, that it drew them into your reality?
I think so. Yeah, I think I sort of opened myself up. I mean, I've never really thought about beings. I know this, quite a few people have filmed various beings, but it's something I've sort of not really been that sort of interested in. I've been mainly aiming up into the skies, but it's just by sheer chance I haven't managed to take a photograph and capture the first being that appeared to be in the greenhouse window. But on further inspection, it appeared as if it was beyond the greenhouse window, and it was the same window each time. And I also went on to film a few other strange things. I filmed some really small entities in a wooded area at the bottom of my garden, and they both had antennae. One looked like an animal, like a little dragon face thing with antennae on the end, and then the other one looked like a face, sort of like a human-like face with antennae over it. It was they looked like little woodland sort of entities or something. So I filmed a few things, but I believe that when you open yourself up to the invisible, it starts opening itself up to you very much, and that's what seems to be happening in my reality. And it's all since I buried my cat Roy, though. So I just wonder if in some cases, I may have opened up something, or just the fact I'm asking, is there anyone there? These things are responding.
Could it be maybe hypothetical, of course, that being quite emotionally sad to bury your cat, in that state of mind, that maybe that does kind of open one up to these spectral phenomena, if you like, whereas someone that's more materially minded and focused, say, on their daily tasks as their job or whatever, are not likely to become attuned to this kind of world. I mean, do you believe that the emotions or the thoughts of you seem to play a part in this in some way?
Oh, definitely, because I didn't know where to start. I thought I'm going to film at night, because there's the GRCU group, which is an Italian research group. They film a lot of stuff at night. So I thought, okay, I'm going to do what they did. I'm going to use a Geiger counter, and I'm just going to go out there with the infrared camera. I'm going to film in complete darkness most of the time. So, my first experience of entities was really when my cat Roy died. I mean, I buried him, and I went out every night taking photographs. And one particular night, I set up the tripod. I must have taken about 100 photographs, and I took 15-second exposures. And in one of the photographs, you can clearly see the whole tomb lit up with invisible light, and there's like a snake-like entity which is coming straight out from the grave, almost posing at head height, and you can see scales on it, and it's got ears and sort of like a long snout, and then next to it, there seems to be like another entity coming straight out of the ground, and it looks almost like it's made of like it's half tree, half human. A really weird thing. And then there's another part of the picture where there's like a head coming down in sweeping motions straight down towards the grave. So all that happened in like 15 seconds of the exposure. And
Nick,
that was
just quickly. You've got these on your website, haven't you? Do you want to give people your web address?
yeah. My website is www.questfortheinvisibles.co.uk.
So is that questioning invisibles or quest invisibles?
That's Quest for the Invisibles.
Oh,
that's
quest.
all one word. Yeah.
Okay. Quest for the invisibles.
Questfortheinvisibles.co.uk.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Okay, so this kind of like snake-like being, it's almost tying into some of the David Icke material in terms of the reptilians and that kind of thing.
Yeah, it seems to be. Yeah. And this is the thing. My sister lived in Egypt, so we got to go out there, the family, quite a lot, and I spent a lot of time, collecting little models of the Egyptian gods, little statues and various things, loads of hieroglyphics and stuff. And I had them all over my room. And since all this happened, I took them all down. I suddenly had this realization that it was something to do with all this, because the being that came from the grave, it looked like Horus, like a Horus type thing. It looked like one of the statues of the jackal. The ears looked dead the same. And I noticed the scales. And I thought, is this Roy, or is this something that's kind of preying on my, I was almost crying at the time. I don't mind admitting. I was so upset. I said a prayer for Roy, and I was saying, "Are you there, Roy? Show me a sign if you're still there. Please let me know you're okay." And my voice was trembling. And at that very second, this thing came straight out of the grave. So I still don't know whether it's Roy or whether it's something that's like an imposter that's, taking advantage of my, of how I felt at the time.
It's really hard to tell because, I mean, this whole thing about reality and entities, it's like even when a medium thinks they're talking to a spirit, and I class myself as a medium, and I hope I am talking to spirit, but you don't 100% ever know. And even when like an alien, so to speak, shows itself, is that some kind of entity that's just taking on an alien form to kind of like please what your request is? And the annoying thing is we'll never know. We'll never know if what we're dealing with is the reality of what they're projecting themselves to be, or whether there's some kind of like morphing, shape-shifting being that's just presenting itself whatever we request. It's a tough one, isn't it?
Yeah, well, this is the problem. I mean, I do believe there are aliens from other planets and stuff, but I believe that what's happening now in the world, I believe that these beings that are showing up in the summoning and these beings that are showing up in the skies, I believe they're all part of a paranormal type thing. I believe that they're interdimensional. I don't believe these entities are necessarily there for our good either. And that's what I come to the conclusion. And the more I read the Book of Enoch, and I see about, the accounts of these beings, even in the Indian texts like the Mahabharata and other texts, they talk about these beings coming down from the skies right the way through history. And, and it's obvious that they presented themselves as gods, and in many cases they seem to have had hybrid children. I mean, you have to look at the skulls that have been found, the elongated skulls in Peru and in Egypt. And, you look at Tutankhamun and the shape of his head, and the fact is, God King, I mean, that's what Pharaoh means. So I think that there's a link in that, and I believe this is still part of the same thing. I really do.
It's interesting, though, that you spotted what you thought potentially was the spirit of your cat coming out of the grave, because some people would perhaps say, well, hang on a minute, if your cat and other animals and people pass over to a spirit world, well, surely they would be inhabiting that realm rather than sitting there laying it in the corpse of the cat or the person or dog or wherever it may be inside the ground, because it's not exactly the best place to be residing. Once you've passed over, you really kind of naturally would be presumably drawn to go on to the next level of existence rather than being earthbound. So maybe the fact that you saw something coming out the ground was kind of something that was leading you down the garden path to your expectations. So it could have been the cat, or it could have been some other entity masquerading as the cat. But the very fact that it appeared to be coming out of the ground was suggesting a bit of an old hat type of trick, that the old kind of perception of where ghosts reside, i.e. the graveyard.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I do believe that, at a certain time after death, I do believe that spirit can come back to the body. I believe that if there's certain people, say, around checking out a body that's in like the funeral home, I do believe that the spirit can come around and hover around for a period of time. So I don't believe it's residing in the body, in the ground. I just believe that when you're at a certain point of where it's buried, I believe that it's aware. But then again, I do believe that perhaps this was something masquerading. I really don't know, because I got 2 images, and on one of the images I got, I'd laid down some flowers for my cat Roy, and they were they were sort of daisy plants, long sort of stem daisy plants. And what happened is, the first photo I took, it's like 2 flashes of energy coming out from the grave site, and they basically look like these daisy plants, which I laid on the actual grave. But there's also a face in there, this really weird looking face, and it appears several times in the photograph, and it's quite an unnerving face, and that made me a bit suspicious, because I didn't really get a good feeling from it. And and that's where a lot of things started happening for me. I started to capture other entities, and things started happening from that point, after I buried Roy. And I spent a whole year from September to September. I must have taken about 5,000 photographs. And although I caught, some photographs of things in the sky and various entities, it just seemed to increase. The more I looked into it, the more weird things kept happening. Really strange things that I can't put my finger on.
Have you sent any of your pictures off to anybody for an analysis, independent analysis? Any scientific type people or paranormal researchers? And I'm presuming also you must have come across a lot of skeptics that have just completely thrown it all out of the window.
Oh yeah. Well, I was on a radio show with Professor Brian Cox a couple of years ago, and he made some statement about it. But no, I haven't. I mean, I basically wrote the book. I didn't sit down and think, I'm going to go and film and then make a book. Basically, what happened was I got a letter from Trevor, and I decided to go in full on into it. I filmed for nearly 3 or 4 years, and then I decided to sit down and just write it all down. And I just happened to mention to Trevor James Constable's publisher, Paul, who I'd actually talked to over the years, that I'd put all my notes down, and I got sort of a rough book, and he was really interested straight away. So before I knew it, it was put together, and the book came out. But I've had a few people sort of talking to me. A few people think they're this, they're that. But I've made I've made a little video. I film insects as well and things. And I'm quite familiar with what insects look like. And I've actually just made a short video, which is on the Quest of the Invisible's YouTube channel. It's called Skyfish Fact or Fiction, and that shows a lot of sort of insect footage to give people an idea of what insects can look like when they get stretched by the the video process, i.e. interlaced video recording.
Okay, so
it makes you wonder. It makes you wonder because this planet is absolutely teeming with life. I mean, there's the absolute void of the universe. There's basically nothing that's living, well, so far as we know, physically living anywhere else in our current kind of like mainstream awareness. And then you arrive on this planet, and everywhere is teeming, from insects to mammals to humans to sea life to amoebas to bacteria. Everything is teeming. And I wonder if the same thing in terms of how life is absolutely teeming on this planet is actually going on in an etheric level that we don't see, kind of like all around us in this kind of like invisible world. It might be absolutely teeming with all kinds of strange wonders, including the strange like twisted faces that you're seeing, and these snake-like beings and fish-like beings. Everything's teeming everywhere on all dimensions.
I agree. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Yeah, I mean, a lot of the things I've filmed, I've managed to film similar things, like in the same sort of things in different places at different times. Some of them behave very like sort of animals, and they seem to fly sort of in flocks, especially like these things that I call the spinning jennies, and they spin through the air rather than flying. But they seem to be just like pure energy. They seem to look like a skate with long wings, a fish, flat fish, or like a manta ray even. And what they do, instead of flapping the wings, they seem to put the fly nose down but spin like a helicopter. So I think there are actual creatures out there on a level, but I also think there are entities as well. I believe that nature abhors a vacuum. I mean, you'll find life at the bottom of the deep oceans, where you get like thermal vents that are really, really hot. So I think life is everywhere. I don't think there is any vacuums really. It may appear to be a vacuum in the physical to us, like in space, but I believe it's full of creatures that are on different levels, and I believe that some of them can come into this reality. But I believe that the sky is full of living creatures. I really do.
One thing that's just occurred to me listening to you there, Nick, was the fact that lots of occultists, magicians, and New Age thinkers talk about our thoughts going out there and manifesting in some way, shape, or form. And many people talk about if they want to create some happening on the physical world, they'll create a mental version of it in their mind, or and they'll create it on the astral. Is some people use that term. And I'm actually now pondering the possibility that perhaps a lot, not maybe everything you're seeing, but a lot of what you could be seeing is literally the stray thoughts of mankind and nature whizzing about around the world, like astral entities, and they're literally our subconscious thoughts that are whizzing around. Or, I mean, we talk about the tulpas that are create, which are thought forms, I think, of the Tibetan monks and things, where they create an idea in their mind of a spirit or something, and then that tulpa becomes like their genie and does things for them. Maybe the Western thinking model won't sort of take that idea very well, but at the same time, they're perhaps still subconsciously producing things like that, and maybe the shapes, the forms, the whizzing creatures, or whatever, could very well be manifestations of our own thoughts.
Oh, definitely. I mean, from the word go, when you're born, you imagine what you want to do before you actually do it. I mean, I always wanted to be a musician, and I dreamt of it, and so I did it, and I thought it, and I imagined I already was a musician, and I just knew that I was going to, be quite successful, and I was at some point. And I believe that every thought you put out, once I believe it goes onto the astral plane, I believe it comes down, and when it can manifest in this physical reality. But another thing is, when I started trying filming, looking into this, I found that by looking into the sky and basically asking for some of these entities to appear, they do, within 10-15 minutes, and it's almost like they can hear your thoughts. And that started me thinking, gosh, how far does this go? Does every thought you put out, go somewhere and then eventually manifest? Because people say, watch what you ask for.
Yeah, I mean, it could be that you might actually be photographing your very own thoughts manifesting rather than some external alien or creature or something. You're thinking of something, and then, hey presto, it shows up on your camera.
Well, to be quite honest with you, when I went into this filming, I didn't have any preconceived ideas. I didn't really know what to expect. I mean, the pictures that are in my book are the combination of 5 years of work. I've caught several different types of things, on different days and over different times. But who knows? I mean, I think thought is everything. I mean, I've always had a saying in my mind that everything exists, everything that can be conceived of possibly exists, and that's something I really do believe.
And you mentioned Brian Cox earlier there, who heard about you or something, but he was quite dismissive of your efforts, I believe. Pretty negative kind of thinking kind of scientist who dismisses ghosts and UFOs and everything. I mean, do you think that science is just too rigid to actually start exploring this? I mean, the guy that you mentioned who wrote the book that inspired you, I mean, from what I read of him, certainly, I mean, Wikipedia just dismisses anyone with the slightest hint of any psychic or paranormal interest and completely writes them off. And so they didn't give him a good write-up on Wikipedia. But, I mean, do you think that science is going to completely sidestep these issues as far as it can, without even bothering to at least say, well, let's pick up a camera and have a look after ourselves?
I believe that the science is already doing it. I believe there's black science going on. I believe that all these things, psychic abilities, have been looked into by the Russians for a long time. And I believe that, there is a section of the scientific community which is kind of undercover, which is seriously looking into all this stuff. But the mainstream science that we read about and we get taught in school, I don't think it's ever going to be looking in, getting really into this. But you got to look at what's happening on TV as well. You've got all these ghost hunting programs and the reality that you can actually talk to spirits and with EVPs and things. And all these programs about UFOs, it all seems to be coming into the realm at the moment. And perhaps science will pick up with it all, and mainstream science will start looking into these things. But I believe that there are people who do know what's going on, and they don't want everyone else to know or to become aware of it.
Well, that's right. The CIA and the American governments of past 50 years at least were looking into things like remote viewing, ESP, the UFO phenomenon, and we've just heard recently that they've admitted the Department of Defense have been looking at the aerial phenomena, as they prefer to call it these days. So they are a very cloak and dagger way of looking at it on a secret level. They're not prepared to admit it, and even police forces use mediums and psychics, and again, they're not prepared to go generally on the official record and say they've used them. But there seems to be an undercurrent in society where people will accept these realities, but in the very professional day-to-day world, we simply brush it under the carpet and briefly laugh at it and refer to ET as little green men or whatever it may be, just to dismiss it, because I think that, but maybe on a professional commercial level, it just interferes too much with our thinking of let's make money, let's consume. Whereas if we actually start to embrace this spiritual, unviewed side to a certain extent, we might actually start to change the paradigm of our complete way of thinking, and the whole of humanity then turns on its head, and we won't be consumers eventually. We'll become more like spiritual seekers, and we'll all become, presumably, which is what they're afraid of, we'll all become hippies at the end of the day.
Well, this is it, Neil, because I mean, it's like I said earlier, there's a force that wants to stop us from evolving and wants to stop Nick from doing his thing, i.e. Interfering with his cameras and his equipment and making his screens go black. So there's obviously a force that wants to suppress that. Hence, we're being given a Mickey Mouse version of science, hence Brian Cox, and the whole consumer thing, the consumerism thing is focus on the material, focus on the latest smartphone, focus on the latest bit of tech, and don't worry about spirituality. Spirituality is all la-di-da hippie stuff, so far as the mainstream is concerned. So yeah, the whole consumerist thing, I think, is really to keep people as dumb and stupid.
Oh, I agree. Television as well. You give them television and you let them sit in a room and act out their thing, all their emotions in front of a TV screen, and then you take away money soon, end up putting a chip in the back of everyone's hand and having full control over you.
I mean, why is it, for instance, we've got a ton of TV programs giving us things about dancing and about singing and about entertainment. Where's the philosophy? Where's the real life questions? Where's the digging deep into what makes humans tick? What makes us human? The spiritual aspects of life, maybe the different spiritual aspects of the different belief systems and religions and things. Instead, we've got, Strictly Come Dancing, pop idols, X Factor on Ice, and all of this, trivial mundanity that at the end of the day, you don't learn anything from it. After seeing something like X Factor or kind of pop idol or Strictly Come Dancing, yes, you might have been slightly entertained, you might have had a bit of a sing along, but what have you learned? How have you progressed? And you haven't. And this is it. There's very rarely any programs out there where you actually progress in any way, shape, or form.
I find.
I agree.
Yeah, go on, Nick. Go on.
They're controlling it. I'm convinced they're controlling what you see, and they're molding what you think. I mean, this is it. It's very hard to tell what is actual reality or not. I mean, they could show you any scenario and say something's happening in the South Pole, like these UFOs coming in. They could tell you anything they want, and how do you know whether it's real or not? Because you're just relying on their version of reality. And I do look into it sometimes and wonder if it is what it's meant to be.
The very fact that you appeared on Radio Oxford, which is BBC Radio Oxford, mainstream, although it's not the big main BBC, but it's still part of the BBC, so it's local radio. I'm presuming it's BBC anyway. I mean, the fact that they were prepared to listen to you, was it kind of a condescending interview? Were they just quite dismissive from the word go? Or were they kind of open-minded? And did they then say, well, let's take a look at your images, or can people look at your images on the website? Was it more positive, or was it a negative experience in that sense?
Well, the interview with Malcolm Boyden was quite good. He seemed to sort of be into the whole idea. But just before I came on to the interview, he actually had Professor Brian Cox on a radio link because he was doing something in Oxford at the time. And he said to Brian Cox, what do you think of my guest after 11 o'clock? His name is Nick, and he's a UFO photographer, and he's discovered sea creatures that are invisible to the naked eye flying over Abingdon. And Brian Cox says, I would question him seriously over that. And Malcolm says, I intend to after 11. And Professor Cox says, oh, yes, yes. What can I say? Malcolm says, well, I'll question him. And Professor Cox comes back in with, make him justify that statement. It would be one of the greatest scientific. It would be the greatest scientific discovery of all time. You're either talking to the person that changes the course of human history or someone else. I'll leave it up to you to decide. And then he sort of chuckles.
So, from your perception, then, that Brian Cox was giving it the thumbs down, even without really kind of listening or bothering to listening to you, really, is he? I mean, I can kind of sympathise with the scientists. Really, is that they must be presented with a lot of people that come to them with various ideas, and I think they just put the shutters down on it, and they really need to have some sort of filtering system that allows some of these strange ideas, strange to them at least, through to at least kind of examine them. I suppose it's up to people like yourselves and us to try and at least collate a lot of this information to present as a kind of unified whole, I suppose, that you maybe, in other words, get together with other people that you might have shared that experience with, who filmed or photographed this phenomena through the infrared, and at least say, well, look, someone else has managed to do it, and the guy that you read the book from, and perhaps contemporaries, maybe in Abingdon, Oxfordshire, or around the UK, or even around the world. I mean, have you actually tried to get together with other people to do that sort of thing?
There's a few people that I've met sort of over the last few years that have filmed similar type things, but not really. No, I mean, to be quite honest with you, I spent 5 years recording constantly, and then a year writing the book, and then sort of 6 months trying to get the website up together. I'm just constantly filming. I didn't really know many people. It wasn't until I noticed that Ellis was doing a few bits about Questing Invisibles, and I got hold of him and said, "Oh, thanks for everything you're doing," and he suggested that I get hold of Ben and a few other people. So it's only been happening over about the last sort of 3 or 4 months that I'm actually in touch with other people like yourselves that are sort of into this thing. So before that, no, I've spent most of the time just in my own isolated world. I mean, I barely left the house for 10 years.
Well, maybe this is the time to step forward boldly and go where no other infrared photographer has been before. Pardon that pun. But for the time being, then, we'll take a break now. It's time to listen to a few messages, and we'll be back with Nik Hayes. Hi, welcome back to the Paranormal Peep Show on the Paranormal UK Radio Network, which is also simultaneously broadcast on the Dark Matter Digital Network in the United States. So welcome to all our listeners there. And we've been joined by Nik Hayes of Oxfordshire in the United Kingdom, along with Andy Chaplin, our regular co-host. And we're talking about the quest for the invisibles, which is a slightly different take on UFOs and aerial phenomena. This is looking for things that you can't normally see with the naked eye or normal photography. This is things that you will have to see with specially adapted cameras using ultraviolet or infrared kind of filters and gadgets and things to hopefully capture what Nik believes is the untapped universe of things literally flying above our heads. Welcome back, Nik.
Hi, how you doing? You right?
Yes, thank you. Now, I was just taking a quick refresher look at your website now, back during the break, and I noticed that we spoke in the first part about whether there are other people doing this kind of photography, and I discovered there was actually a team of Romanians and Italians that were unaware that other people were like yourselves were doing it by the sounds of it, and earlier pioneers, and they seem to have stumbled across similar kind of phenomena as you. Have you seen any of their pictures or anything?
Yes, well, I first found out about the GRCU, and which is the Italian group led by Luciano Bocconi, and the Romanian group from a book by Trevor James Constable, and it talked about a book that was released in the 1980s called La Realtà Nascosta, which means, well, UFO La Realtà Nascosta. So basically, UFO, the hidden reality. And I got hold of that book. It's a very rare book. Cost me a few £100 at the time, but it's very rare, and it contains lots of infrared photographs taken showing entities and various strange forms that are in the invisible. It's all in the infrared. They used infrared film in a standard camera, the same as Trevor James Constable.
Now, obviously, we've got digital cameras these days, but when this was first starting, people were developing infrared film. I mean, most of us at a certain age can remember going down, and in fact, from some years I did work in photo processing standard 35mm print film or negative film. That's called C41 processing, if I recall. Is there a special processor required for like the negatives of infrared film, or is it literally the same sort of technology that's used to bring forth a negative?
It's basically the same sort of technology. I mean, because Trevor took so much, obviously the cost was there, so he decided to start developing his own films. But the problem is, it's got to be done in total darkness. And even when you put the film in a camera, the slightest pinprick of light will show up on the film. It will fog the film. And he had several sort of tries in his early days where the film was just completely fogged and blurry, and he didn't realize for a long time that it was because of the pinprick of light that was coming in. So everything had to be handled and the processing done in complete darkness, which made it quite a hard task. And I've decided not to go that route, even though I have a kit that I could do my own processing. It just seemed digital was the best way for me, really. It's more cost effective, and also a lot of people starting to look into the world with digital cameras, and I found it very exciting. And of course Trevor sort of urged me on at the same time and said, come on Nick, try it, see what you can get from it. So that was what really sort of got me to using digital rather than the other option, the infrared film.
And also on your website you mentioned the space shuttle mission where it's the tethered incident, or well, I can't quite recall which mission it was, but it was this. Was it like a mile-long kind of cable or something that snapped in space or something like that? And that's where they saw literally loads of these infrared UFOs flying around the shuttle.
Yeah, I believe that was right. I think it extended it into a 12-mile, almost like a tape measure. I think it was a couple of miles wide, but yeah, it seemed to attract lots of invisible UFOs. I think these were actually recorded in ultraviolet, but they look very similar to some of the objects recorded by Trevor in the infrared during his work in the Mojave deserts in the late 1950s. And Trevor also mentions that in his book, and that's the first time I actually heard about it, to be quite honest with you.
It makes me wonder why NASA were using ultraviolet cameras deliberately on that particular mission. It's almost as if they're expecting to see them.
It does make you wonder, doesn't it? I mean, it seems to be a funny choice, but I'm sure they'd turn around and say that they were trying to see, a certain spectrum to see if there's any loss of energy, or they've always got an answer, I believe. So it is very strange, though. Instead of why didn't they use infrared, or why did they need to use anything that filmed in the invisible in the first place?
Well, that's right. And you mentioned in part one about the cloud busting equipment you use, where you literally take some poles and bury them into a pond or water of some sort, which seems to diffuse the clouds above, and it seems to attract this phenomena. And I'm now thinking that maybe, although NASA might say they were testing out cables for whatever reason, I can't remember, that this tethered incident on the shuttle was perhaps a non-disclosed experiment where they're trying to literally attract these infrared beings or phenomena, at least, using that kind of tether thing in the same way that you've been using your cloudbuster thing.
That could well be, but I mean, the official explanation was that they were using it to take power to actually to help the space station to save money on operating costs, I believe. But that's what they said. But you've got to take their word at face value, and to be quite honest with you, I don't think you can all the time.
Well, no, I mean, I know that the shuttle had quite a few military uses, which they would not disclose, certain things that went up in the shuttle, the Department of Defense, and, certain members of the shuttle team were, Department of Defense reps, I think. So a lot of the time, what appeared to be a kind of general science or testing of the kit was actually something a bit more secretive and perhaps under the Official Secrets Act of sorts. Andy, do you recall the space shuttle tethered incident?
Yeah, I've seen that. It's hard to know what to make of it, really. I mean, NASA is, never a straight answer. They kind of like poo-poo these kind of claims, and they'll always come up with some kind of rational explanation. But it is a bit of a strange one. I mean, there's also these space particles that go past the window sometimes, and they kind of like change direction, which is not something you'd expect from normal space dust or particles. So. Yeah, curious one, really.
Yeah, I mean, go on, Nick.
I was going to say, well, the actual mission was the STS-75, and they attempted to deploy a tethered satellite system, and the intention of this tether was to absorb power from outer space, and that was hopefully going to increase the satellite's endurance and cut down on operating costs. It was 12-mile long electrodynamic tether, and it snapped and became a 12-mile long energized cord, which apparently is what attracted dozens of the UFOs. Which looked like something from something from the biological world, the small, very, very small. It looked like
well, that's right.
Like seen from an aquarium, maybe.
That's right. It's like you're looking through a big microscope down at all the little microbes swimming around in a dish of sorts. And there was one. I think the main one that a lot of people sort of focused their attention on was this one that had like a hole in it. It was like almost like a flying donut. And someone else pointed out that it was the same kind of craft was spotted elsewhere around Earth or something, or photographed elsewhere. But yeah, I mean, it could be that the electroactivity of this cable literally was like a static electricity and pulled them into it or something. I mean, maybe, they're saying they're trying to power the space station with energy from outer space, and thinking, well, I've never heard that one before. So it's a bit of a strange one. It sounds like it was almost like a vacuum cleaner to hoover them up and maybe catch them or something.
It may well have been, yeah. I mean, you don't know. I mean, I heard the other day that they were using the space shuttle to do stuff with metal. They were getting certain metals to mix that couldn't be done in Earth's atmosphere, which I find quite interesting, because I actually worked in a foundry for 9 years when I left school. And, it's very interesting. I've always been into sort of different metals. But I've heard all sorts of things. But, you just don't know what to believe half the time. This is the problem.
Well, that's it. The official story is always the official story, and sometimes you literally have to read between the lines. And considering what was found in that video, which was actually, I believe, there was a guy, I think he might have been in Canada, but I could be wrong. He might have been in the United States, where he was a disabled guy, and because he couldn't get out of the house, he just stayed all day. He was interested in space and astronomy and the space shuttle missions as well. He somehow had all the equipment to tune in and download NASA's feeds and things. I think a few people have done that actually, and they used to sit there and go through all the material of the live NASA feeds and download it. And it was thanks to people like them that they exposed a lot of this phenomenon that we probably wouldn't know about to talk about it today, really.
Yeah, well, I think that was David Serrada. I think he was the guy who released it. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people. I mean, people sit there and look at television screens looking for rods and different things. I mean, there's a lot of people out there, looking and trying to see just what they can find. I mean, which is great, really. But, people listening to the transmissions as well, radio, people that are into radio, listening to I think there's been a few things that have been listened to in the past where NASA haven't released something, and these guys have heard what was being said, what they didn't want the population to hear. So, I think it's people looking at things on many different levels, which is good,
Yeah, I mean, with the shuttle thing now, we don't obviously have the shuttle anymore. They've retired that, but I presume the secret powers that be presumably are still looking into these things, or coming across them in their ultraviolet or infrared analysis of what's outside the space station or satellites and things like that. Now, getting back to more down to earth things from your own experiments, you've got lots of different things. It's not just like UFOs. You've got sort of what some people might describe as creatures. I mean, there appeared to be one of them that you described as a small winged being in one of your pictures. It sounds like a fairy. What was that about?
Yeah, well, that was I think that was a nighttime shot that was taken above a 60-foot tree. Yeah, I decided to first go out just after Roy died. I think that was just before Roy died, when I was initially testing the camera out at night. I just got a big Geiger counter hit I was aiming sort of right above a huge tree, and I just decided to take a photograph, and that appeared in the photograph. I took several photographs, but that was the only one that anything appeared in. But yeah, that was above a tree. I don't know what it is. It looks like a sort of cross between a fairy and something else, really. It's just weird. I mean, somebody said, "Oh, I reckon that's a firefly," but it was taken in the middle of winter, high above a tree in darkness. So, I don't think it was a firefly.
And do you kind of, do you stick to a particular, or did you stick to a particular routine to go and photograph this phenomenon? Like, for instance, okay, I'm going to go out every Wednesday night between 7 and 10 o'clock, or did you just do it as the mood took you? I'm trying to think that in the sense of and Andy would know this, about in psychic development circles, it was always a good idea to try and keep to a regular schedule of either meditating or being in a psychic circle at least once a week to keep up a sort of discipline about it, because over a period of time you'd get better results as the other side, if you like, would be aware that you're trying to work with them, and then they would actually accumulate and try and work with you to produce phenomena or readings or whatever. And I'm just wondering if you had a kind of a similar kind of discipline to produce the phenomena, or did you just go out and take it on random evenings?
No, I film constantly. I film constantly for every day, every minute. I walk the dogs 4 times a day, and when I'm not walking the dogs or doing a bit of gardening, because I don't work, I'm constantly doing it. I've always got a camera with me. I've always got a Geiger counter with me. Constantly, I live it. You know, I recorded for nearly 5 years. I was out perhaps every day when there was a blue sky. I'd be out because I rely on a blue sky for a lot of the daytime stuff. But it's just permanently doing it day in, day out. And then when I wasn't filming, I was looking back at the footage I'd taken. But at night, over the last year, I've probably taken about 5,000 photographs. I've been out every night, every time I walk the dogs, because I live in a sort of like a nature reserve area with a forested area, and it's quite sort of creepy and dark. So I tend to take a lot of photographs there. But I only take photographs when I get a high Geiger counter hit. But I live it. I totally live it all the time. I've always got my Geiger counter on me. Always got a camera on me. So you know, I'm always prepared.
And the idea of using a Geiger counter, and most people know that is to detect radioactivity, and we see it in films and things where they're trying to detect radioactive leakages from power stations or wherever it might be. And some people have suggested that there's radioactivity associated with UFOs. What prompted you to get a Geiger counter in the initial stages of this sort of investigation?
Because I read the book by Luciano Bocconi, the Italian guy who was part of the GRCU, the Italian people. They used a whole range of indicators, from heat and light indicators, infrared indicators, through to Geiger counters. And I thought, oh, I'll give that a try. And they were getting some good results. So I started just going out with the Geiger counter. And I noticed that every now and then there'd be really huge hits, but they only lasted for a fraction of a second. So I basically started shooting in that direction. And bit by bit, I got a feel for it, and started getting results. So yeah, I mean, it's I set the Geiger counter for it measures in microsieverts, and I put it to 2 microsievert, 0.2 microsieverts, and it doesn't normally go anywhere near that. It normally goes up to about 0.12. So I put it for 2.20. Every now and then you just get a sudden hit. And then I found that when I take photographs, there's normally something in it. I mean, it may be quite far away, or it may be slightly not in focus, but it is a good indicator of something that seems to be manifesting into the invisible. So it's obviously they're coming from somewhere into the realm of the infrared. Because the beings that I got in the greenhouse, I got a huge Geiger counter hit, and I took the photo, and I saw nothing, and they appeared in the infrared. So I believe that there was something happening when they came from where they came from into the infrared. Some kind of reaction that caused a hit on the Geiger counter. Some kind of radiation was created.
So in terms of these beings, Nick, we were talking actually during the break off air about the interaction that you had with a kind of like a reptilian being after one of your meditations. Do you want to give us the story on that one?
Yeah, well, I've had a few weird things started happening. I saw a couple of weird lights on the dogs, and the dogs froze. So I basically got one of them, put one of them in the main house, took one of them upstairs, and he started acting really weird and just staring at the wall. And he started backing off, and then sort of like, how can I describe it, snarling at one point. So that's when I first became aware there might be something in the room. So this particular night, I started doing like a meditation. I'd only just started it. I closed my eyes, and straight away, I thought I heard someone call my name. And then all of a sudden, I saw this being with my eyes closed. And when I actually opened my eyes, because it made me jump, I actually partially saw the being, and it was like evaporating into like a cloudy mist. But it actually said boo, like that, just like boo.
And
describe, quite scary.
Describe in detail what it looked like. Was it solid? Was it transparent? Was it ghostly?
Well, when I had my eyes closed in the meditation, it looked as real as looking at another human being. It was so real, and I thought I was actually completely in that reality. And
would you say that it looks like sort of a human with a reptilian face, or was it completely dragon looking?
From what I saw, it was probably about 7 or 8 foot tall, and it looked pretty humanoid. But I didn't. I only saw it for a split second when I had my eyes closed, and it made me jump. But I just remember seeing warty sort of things and like little sort of scales and warts. I didn't really get a massive good look at it, but it sort of imprinted in my mind. But it was scary, and it had like big eyes. When I opened my eyes, all I saw was a vaporized version of it, and it gradually just disappeared in front of my very eyes. So I saw it mainly with my eyes closed, and it's almost like I went into its reality just for a second, like I nodded off into its reality. But it must have been in my physical reality. So it was alarming, but no, it wasn't very nice. I'll tell you that.
Has this kind of thing put you off, like doing this investigation where you're getting a few iffy, suspect kind of beings encroaching your research?
It's made me sort of think about what some of them might want, because I feel for a while that I've perhaps been helped by some of these beings to get certain pictures, and it was all going really well. And then once I started having the realization that some of these beings that are being summoned aren't necessarily there for our good, then everything seemed to go haywire. Things started appearing, things started disappearing, and it all seemed to go mad after I had this big realization. And that's when I removed all the papyrus and the various statues of the Egyptian pantheon. I took them out of the room. And it seemed to really start then. It was almost like I was being punished for not going along with the plan, so to speak.
Do you suspect, Nick, that it could be a case that you may have been working with ones on the light side that want to help us and then got hijacked by the dark ones? Or do you think they were dark all along and they started off pretending to be light, but they've always been dark from the beginning?
Oh yeah, well, yes, it's a hard one to know. It's a hard one to know. At first I thought they were there for our good. I started doing a bit of summoning, and within a couple of minutes, maybe 4 or 5 minutes sometimes, these beings would appear. Well, they'd appear as like balloons high in the sky, and at the same time, all the red kites from miles around would gather in a huge circle and fly round, and these things would emerge from the invisible into the middle of these kites. And and then all of a sudden they'd appear and they'd come down, and I'd flash a mirror to them and they'd flash back. And I was thinking, hey, this is working really well. And then it suddenly sort of occurred to me that, I'm putting my thoughts out there and they can pick up my thoughts. So, how far into our reality are they? And have I suddenly opened myself up that much that I've got a direct sort of door into my reality? And it was then I started doubting. When I started reading about, the Book of Enoch and about what some of these so-called beings had done, I started wondering if these were actually the same beings. And especially with what happened with my cat, with the reptilian type thing that came out from the cat's grave, I started wondering if this was all part of this, agenda that people talk about. So I don't know. I mean, I like to think, you get people like Stephen Greer saying, all these beings that are interdimensional, the fact that they're interdimensional means that they're good guys and, they can't be nasty. But I started to wonder perhaps they could be, because, these fallen angels are interdimensional beings, creator beings, and they, just don't know what they want. So I don't know. I don't know whether I've been hijacked or not, or whether I was sort of had the wool pulled over my eyes from the word go, and I was subconsciously willing these things to come, and they were sort of doing it for me and helping me along, maybe to use me for some kind of agenda. But now I've realised what's going on and stopped for a little bit and sort of stepped back. Perhaps they're not happy with it. It's hard to know.
I mean, the very fact that I think humankind, all of nature, I think, is probably interdimensional. When we die, we pass over into an astral or spiritual world, or maybe a little bit of both, and go on to other dimensions anyway. So by our own nature, we are interdimensional. And, there's cases of people going out of their bodies when they're asleep, out-of-body experiences, astral traveling, call it what you will. And yet, across the whole spectrum of people, there's good guys, bad guys, downright nasty. So it makes sense that, just because they're in the spectral realm or the infrared realm or whatever you want to call it, it doesn't necessarily make them good guys either. In the same way that, you can go out to nature and you can see, lions and tigers across the fields of Africa or wherever it is. And, they could be attacking deer or whatever as part of their nature. So although they may seem to be bad guys, it could be just part of their nature, of the way they're made up or something. It could be a misrepresentation of what we believe in our minds to be good and evil. But the fact that they behave badly in some way, it could be just our perception of what we perceive to be good and what we define as evil, and it's literally just the way the nature of the beast as such.
Oh yeah, no, I definitely agree. I definitely agree because we're looking at it from a human perspective. What's good. I mean, even in the human life, I mean, what's good for one isn't good for someone else. So I suppose it's very easy to put it to look at it like in a human nature to think, oh, there's a good and there's a bad, but I don't know. They just obviously do what they do. I mean, beyond the human form, I mean, there just is. There are actions, I suppose, and reactions to that. So I suppose it's, as I say, what's good for one may not be good for the other. Someone may consider something bad and it could be good for another. So, so I really don't know. It's hard to know.
So, have you tried to record any audio with these things? I'm just thinking that in the sense of digital audio recorders, and you can actually record things. For instance, the sounds that maybe a dog or a cat might hear, but humans can't hear. And I'm wondering if there are like audio recorders that will record that and maybe capture like communications or something of these entities that are flying above your house. Has that occurred to you?
No, I mean, the thing is, when I'm recording, it picks up the sounds of the insects it's not the insects, sounds of the birds and various things. But I've never heard any voices on anything that I've done. I mean, obviously, EVPs as well. I mean, I've backed away from actually trying to make contact with these various beings that seem to have come around me. I've been advised not to get too deeply into that part of it. I just don't want to open doors that I can't close, really.
Who advised you, Nick, out of interest?
Just a couple of sort of spiritual people that I've talked with have said to me, just be careful of, what these beings want and don't give yourself over to them. But, it can be very confusing at times because, as you say, you don't know what's good. It's just a state of being. What's good is for one and could be bad for another person. So it's hard to know what their motives are. And it's just all part of working out the bigger scheme of everything, I suppose. And it's just a pretty full-on thing to think about at times.
Are these things, do you think they're aware of each other? I mean, you've got creatures that look like rods or something with the kind of little propeller ends and things. And I've heard of rods many years ago from someone that I used to know, and they talked about rods, and I looked on the internet, and these were captured, I believe, with just fast action photography. I think there's a few videos on the internet where they've been caught, quite high up in the air, flying past people that are in microlight aircraft and things like that. I mean, you've got something that appears to be like rods on some of your pictures. I mean, would you agree they're rods?
Some things are skyfish. Yeah, I prefer to use the word skyfish. But I filmed a lot of stuff in the infrared. I filmed torpedo-like. If you look at the evidence section on skyfish on my website, you'll see some torpedo-like skyfish and some sort of javelin-like skyfish with large fin-like structures. But they do seem to behave like animals. I mean, the things that I call the spinning jennies, they seem to fly in flocks together. They seem to have sort of like animal behavior. If you look at the video that I've made, spinning jennies and plasmatic gliders, you'll see some footage of these things gliding through the air. And there's one bit of footage where this glider comes straight towards me, and I could see it on the screen in the infrared, but obviously I couldn't see anything in the normal light spectrum. So I was moving back trying to keep it in frame, but it seemed to be coming straight at me as if it knew that I wanted to film it or something. It was incredible. But they seem to act rather like creatures, a lot of them. But I believe there's everything is going on. I believe there's entities, there's creatures, and I believe there's things that can change their form. I think it's just a whole mixing pot, to be quite honest with you.
It's almost as if there's a curiosity about them, the fact that they're aware that someone spotted them. And so there's like a curiosity for fish in a fish tank. If you sort of tap the glass on a fish tank, a fish will come up and maybe look at it or something. Or when you're down in the ocean, fish will, out of curiosity, swim towards divers and things like that to sort of see who is this strange, weird fish in their pond or in their sea. And in a sense, you're an intruder into their world to a certain extent, although I think it sounds like, I mean, the fact that they must be aware, I presume, of everybody else to a certain extent from their perception physically in our world. But it's somehow they seem to know that you're taking an extra special interest in them. Maybe it is the fact that you're sending out thoughts or something, and they're operating on some sort of thought process that they can. It's like a beacon. They're honing in on you or something.
Uh, yeah, well, of course, I'm using the Cloudbuster as well. But it's very hard to know whether they're actually sort of in our physical reality at all, because they're obviously just reflecting ultraviolet or infrared light. I mean, many of the things that I've recorded in ultraviolet, I've basically used the sun obliteration technique. And these things, when they come by, they're just lit up for a fraction of a second. What I do, I block the sun behind a building, and I basically make what I call the illumination zone. And anything flying past or slightly above this zone is totally illuminated. And some of these things are just lit up for a fraction of a second, and then they become invisible again, even to the infrared or ultraviolet camera. So it's hard to know if they're actually in this physical reality, or whether we're just getting just a reflection of them just for that moment as they're reflecting infrared or ultraviolet. It's hard to actually know, but they definitely do seem to respond. Some of them seem to know you're filming, and they seem to come around. But obviously, I'm using the Cloudbuster, so could argue that the Cloudbuster's attracting them, and they're coming to see what's happening, because I always film in the direction of the Cloudbuster, and I do certain movements with the Cloudbuster, and I train all the cameras exactly where the Cloudbuster is aiming, and everything I catch is almost in line with the Cloudbuster, always.
It's interesting because you said you live in a bit of a kind of a nature reserve type of thing with woodlands and greenery around you. So a skeptic would say, "Oh, you're just capturing insects because you're in the woods, so it's natural you're going to capture weird buzzing insects right near your camera and things like that." But the fact that it's been done by other people and in space as well, by the space shuttle mission, seems to rule that out. And certainly looking at the pictures on your website, 99% of them to me don't look anything like insects. There's some weird stuff on there that defies conventional explanation, I would think. I mean, has anyone in expertise science looked at your pictures and been willing to kind of look at it and say, yeah, that's strange, or have they dismissed you out of hand?
I haven't really been in contact with that many people, but you see, a lot of the time when I actually film with a standard camera or a CCTV camera, and I've noticed that a lot of these things don't appear in the normal light spectrum. And I don't see anything either. And then the thing is, I don't film. I film above some tall trees, and yeah, there are insects, but I basically film insects as well. And so I've just made a YouTube video which shows insects being elongated and shows some of the forms that insects can appear like, from slower moving sort of daddy long legs type creatures flying through the sky to mosquitoes. And these things only seem to reflect the sunlight and appear stretched when they're within a couple of feet from the camera. And the fact is, what I've noticed is when I film with a normal camera, you'll see insects, but a lot of insects don't seem to figure in the ultraviolet or the infrared, because they don't seem to have enough body mass to actually reflect unless they're quite near to the camera. And in that case, they're very often out of focus. I haven't successfully filmed many insects in the infrared or the ultraviolet because of that. They're either overexposed or look blurry because they're too near to the camera lens, or they're further apart. But if on the video I've made, you can clearly see what insects do turn into when they're filmed with elongated, due to the interlaced video recording. And these things I'm recording are a lot different. And very often, I say they don't appear on the normal footage which is taken as well. So they seem to be just existing in the invisible.
Have you seen any entities that might be described as kind of classical mythical beings, such as goblins or pixies or elves or anything of that nature? Because I'm just wondering if there's, in the ancient worlds, when people describe things like goblins and stuff, that we look on as just, oh, it's just folklore, it's just mythology. I wonder if there might be some kind of strange basis in fact that people might have been actually seeing these types of entities.
Oh, definitely. If you look on my website, you'll see two entities that I filmed that have got antennae, and they look very like elementals. What I class as elementals, that they're sort of in mid-air. There's a creature-like entity, and I think that's it looks like a dragon face, and it's got two antennae, and next to it is a more sort of human-y sort of looking entity, and it's got multiple antennae on its head. And that definitely looks like some kind of, wood spirit or elemental. But I believe that goblins, all these things, they exist. I believe that everything exists, but on different levels. I mean, it may be that years ago, before people had, more preconceived sort of notions of the 21st century, when they were living perhaps in tribal society, this reality was a lot more, in their life than it is now. I mean, if you look at some of the tribal people around the world, this kind of thing features very heavily in their folklore. So I think there is truth in it, and I have recorded a couple of things, especially this entity with the antenna on its head that looks very like an elemental, and you can see that on the website.
It's interesting, actually, because what you're saying there reminds me very much of the Cottony Fairies story, which took place in Yorkshire, I believe, during the First World War. It was made into a film called Fairy Tale in the mid-90s, and it concerned two cousins who suggested that they saw fairies literally down the end of their garden or by a brook or a spring or something, and they were loaned a camera by their father, or one of the girls' fathers, to try and take pictures of them. And that's where the big controversy came about, because once they had these films, or plates as they were in those days, developed, they appeared to show beings on them. But it was later shown and proven that what the girls had done they'd literally drawn or cut out images of people from magazines, drawing of people in magazines, and drew feather wings on them and things like that, and gave the impression they were dancing. And these girls would sit and pose with them on long exposures for their pictures. But it was pointed out where you got the brook behind them, with running water, the running water appeared blurred because it was a long, maybe 30-second exposure. And the fairies dancing around in this particular picture, their wings were perfectly sharp because they were literally just made of paper. And so they did admit, maybe in the sort of the mid 80s, I think, or maybe in the 90s when the last of them died, that they did fake the pictures, but they were convinced that they still saw them as young children, but they thought that no one's going to believe them. So they actually deliberately faked the pictures to try and prove to the grown-ups that they were actually seeing this phenomena. And Arthur Conan Doyle, who wrote Sherlock Holmes, he was drawn into it and actually published the pictures in his magazine of the day, and he truly believed in them. But obviously, he was taken in a little bit by it with his enthusiasm, and he didn't really look at the scientific side of things, and perhaps didn't understand photography as much as we do today in that sort of sense to sort of see through that. But there was one of the people that was from the Psychic Society of the time that worked with these young girls to go and see the fairies. And because he was psychic, he actually confirmed in a book of his own, whether he was lying or not, I can't say, but he actually said that he was using his psychic vision to see exactly what these girls were seeing. And he described seeing tiny fairy creatures and things, and actually was quite adamant that they were definitely seeing something, even though the pictures later proved that at least the pictures were fake, even if the story wasn't totally a write-off. And I'm just wondering if you're capturing similar things of what the Cottony fairies were. Maybe rather than turn your camera skywards, maybe focus on meadows, flowers, plants, things like that, because supposedly there's lots of these things hanging around the plants, and they supposedly work with the plants and nurture them and things like that. Have you ever thought of trying that, Nick?
Well, yeah, I often go into the forest. I mean, these two entities that I caught side by side that remind me of the elementals. I mean, that was taken in total darkness, and they're obviously their own light source. There's no flash or anything used, and that's the case with a lot of the entities I've filmed. The ones in the greenhouse, I did use the flash, but the other things I filmed in the woods, they do seem to be, their own light source, and they do seem to be real. But yeah, you're right. I mean, I'm trying various different things. I film in the sky, I film at ground level. I'm trying all sorts of things. I mean, I'm sort of writing my own rules, really. I just go where my instinct takes me. And the last year I've been filming around the garden with a Geiger counter at night. And now I'm sort of looking to going back into the daytime. But I'm certainly going to start going out of the way and trying to film in other areas to see if I can capture more of these beings, because they do exist. They are real. They live in a realm. And I think it's not a matter of seeing them. I think, the third eye is very, very important. Especially at night, I think you can see more at night. And I think you're not actually seeing them with your physical eyes all the time. You're seeing them, with the third eye, and that's encroaching on your vision. But they're very, very real. I'm convinced they're real. I really am.
Andy, do you see anything with your psychic vision at all? Your third eye? I mean, when you're doing clairvoyance on the stage, do you see any entities or spirits walking around the rooms?
I don't really do it that way, to be honest. But I will say in my dreamscape, I've come across kind of not exactly entities, but spirits that aren't quite so nice. I have had that, and I was actually saying to Nick during the break that at my most kind of spiritual, I suppose you could call it, when I was meditating quite a lot, and when I was in a high vibration, I was getting a lot of attacks psychically. I was getting the feeling of being watched and being remote viewed. I was getting all the helicopters. I was getting the phone calls and people flashing their headlights at me randomly and constantly. So yeah, it is out there. There is kind of like a force out there that's kind of like trying to bash the nail back down, if you see what I mean. And I think there's a Japanese phrase, isn't it? Don't be the nail that sticks out, because it's going to be the nail that gets hit first. So that was kind of my experience. The more spiritual you want to become, the more you raise your vibration, the more there are entities or spirits out there that want to put you back in your place. And I certainly know that Nick's had that kind of experience and run-ins. Nick, on the kind of like the more materialistic side of things, the 3D world, can you describe to us whether you've had any Men in Black experiences, or whether you've been followed, or had your phones tapped or anything like that at all?
Yeah, well, during that time when my camcorder was seized, I had these black cars that were sitting at the end of the road. They had very similar. They looked very similar, the two cars that were operating, and they had very similar sort of vehicle registrations. But yeah, I got followed for a long time. They were watching my house, and it's not easy to watch my house because you have to go down a drive to get out of it and through an electronic gate. But they sat right up the end of one of the roads, and as soon as I went out, I'd be followed. I mean, I knew they were following me though, because I saw one of them put the walkie-talkie down the side, and I heard him distinctly say, "That's the male we're after." And I twigged straight away that this must be something to do with my camcorder, and the American intelligence must have got onto the British intelligence, and and got them watching me, and they followed me into Oxford. This went on for a good couple of months. I felt very, very unnerved. I lost about 1.5 stone in weight. I didn't eat for about nearly 3 or 4 months. I got quite ill because the constant thought of, why are they watching me? What's going on? And then drones started coming over, and I got worried, with the actual cloudbuster, because the only picture they would have had of me would have been off my last website, and that had a picture of me with a cloudbuster. It looks like a rocket launcher, so I didn't know if they understood what a cloudbuster was. So yeah, I've had a lot of stuff like that going on. I've had cars just pull up, and someone's wound the window down and just looked at me, and then drove off. And I'm thinking, oh my God, what's going on? It's very worrying.
Out of interest, Nick, did you have the flashing headlights randomly?
No, I've never had flashing red headlights. No, but my phone was tapped. I got rid of my phone because basically the only way they could have had my mobile was from my website. And what happened was, when I rang the airport, they said they'd ring me back, and I rang them on a home phone. And when they rang me back, they rang me back on my mobile. And and that freaked me out in the first place. So as soon as I finished the call, I basically cut the SIM card up, and then I noticed they were following me, and I gave them run for the money. That's all I can say.
Mm. Here's a really strange one. There was a friend of mine who Neil knows, who's quite psychic, and I talk about her quite a lot on the show, where she's had just as much weird things as me. There's this one particular time I had an Indian guy call me up, and he says to me, "Hello, what's your name?" No, actually not that. He said, "Hello, are you okay?" That's it. "Hello, are you okay?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Are you sure you're okay?" And I said, "Yes." And then he just hangs up. Within half an hour, my friend gets a similar call. She gets an Indian guy calling her up, asking if she's okay. Now, the weird thing is, this must be somebody who's got both my mobile number and her mobile number. This is what doesn't make sense. My number and her number. We don't go around willy-nilly giving out our mobile numbers to people. And it would need to be somebody mutual. And now, for this particular friend, there's very few mutual friends, so I have no idea how that happened. And in actual fact, about a month ago, I get a strange call from, it sounded like a call center, but there's a guy that says, hello, this is PC World. And they asked for my friend's name, but they called my mobile number. So I call her and say, what's this all about? There's somebody from PC World calling my mobile but asking for you. And she said she has no idea what that's about. She's not ordered anything. She didn't give my mobile number. It makes you wonder what systems your number is on and what on earth is going on when you get these weird, strange calls from people that make no sense. Have you had anything like that, Nick? Like some real odd kind of like phone calls?
Oh yes, definitely, and odd texts. I mean, I've changed my number quite a few times since this last incident. But the thing is, though, I mean, they've got software. I mean, if they're looking into you, for instance, they'll know everyone you've rang, and they can get like a whole printout. They know who's linked with who. I mean, and this is why I don't use Facebook. I mean, it goes right into the control thing. You're almost like putting all the answers in their hands. I mean, not that you got anything to hide, but the fact is, it gives away everything, Facebook. And I think they do similar things with the phone. But I think there's certainly people out there, like Men in Black type people, who are definitely, making life hard for people. And it's something that I've realised over the last year or so. And, I never realised things like that could happen. I just wasn't prepared for any of that kind of stuff, and for the weird sort of paranormally stuff. Although I've had a few friends who've died, you see, so I didn't know whether some of it was to do with that or not. But I had a very strange thing happen when my mum died. Me and my sister went back to my mum's flat back in the Midlands, and a friend of ours came round, an Iranian friend who used to know us from the Midlands. And as he walked in the door, I was saying to my sister, I wonder where my mum is, obviously because she's died. And basically his phone lit up, and he got a message that went not to his inbox, but on the front of his phone, and it said, "Just want you to know that when you die, you're not when you're dead, you don't really die. I'm still here with you." And that actually came to my friend's phone, and that was not in his inbox, but on the front of his phone.
That is bizarre.
But not to my phone. I'd have loved to have that on my phone. And basically, he said that when he turned his phone off later and put it back on, it went. But he couldn't get rid of it or anything. It was just sitting on the front of his phone. I believe that was from my mum. I did at the time. But sometimes I wonder what to believe, whether, you could be being targeted by some force because you're in that, that emotional state where you're upset. But it just sounded very like the sort of thing my mum would say.
That's very interesting. Talking about getting targeted, it's not paranormal, but it just shows exactly to the level of what these agents, if you want to call them, go to. My brother lives in Wales, and he lives right near the Celtic Manor golf course, and he's got electronic gates and a long big driveway, very private residence. And it turned out that at the Celtic Manor golf course, there's the Celtic Manor Hotel, and they were getting President Barack Obama, over from the US to attend a meeting or something. I'm not quite sure what he was doing there at that particular time, but for like 2 weeks, they had to put all these barriers up around the road that led to my brother's house and his neighbours and things like that, because literally his garden backed onto this hotel resort and golf course and everything, right where Barack Obama was staying. And my brother said that his friend, who's in the police force and high up, actually knew that Barack Obama actually wasn't staying at the hotel, which was put about to the general media, and the general populace thought he was staying there. And so my brother actually found out via his police mate, and we won't mention names, where he was actually staying. So my brother was on the phone to my dad, and he was talking about this fact, and he's on his mobile, and he says, yeah, Barack Obama is not staying at the Celtic Manor Hotel. He is staying at the, and then beep, his phone was cut off straight away. And he thought that's a bit of a coincidence, So he reckoned that the CIA or agents that were there to protect Barack Obama was listening to everyone's local phone calls to see what they're planning or talking about. And as soon as my brother was going to give the location, the true location of where Barack Obama was, he was cut off.
This would be Echelon. Neil, have you heard of Echelon?
No, I haven't, no.
Okay, so in Menwith Hill in North Yorkshire, basically there is a listening base that monitors all traffic of all electronic communications. It's run by the Americans, but it's in Britain. I think it's officially an American base. And basically they pick up on key words, and if they pick up on a key word of interest, such as Barack Obama, an actual human will start listening. And if it goes up the chain, if it's something that's got a red flag on it, i.e. the location of the president, that will go up the chain to someone higher up in command, as opposed to kind of like well, they'll probably have kind of like privates or low rankings just listening, and then if they find something wrong, they'll talk to their sergeants or their their chief officers or whatever, and then they'll probably have somebody listening in and waiting for the right moment to press the kill switch, essentially. So what they're listening for is kind of like keywords. So our communications right now on Skype right now will be listened to because we've mentioned a President Barack Obama. So we're not actually giving his location or kind of like
because we don't know it.
Well, this is it. Well, there's nothing of interest. Put it this way: there's nothing of interest that we're talking about where they would cut it off. Having said that, it's probably going to go dead. But for instance, if we were about to give the location of Donald Trump, then maybe we would have our Skype cut off. I do know that Simon Parks, very often he gets cut off when he talks about certain subjects on radio interviews. He will be talking about certain UFO stuff or certain government stuff or things that he's come across, and the lines will go dead. It's just the nature of it. But the interesting thing is, Neil, you say there's kind of like it's not really paranormal, but I bet, Nick, that you found that when you had the weird stuff happening with the phone calls and the cars following you, I bet you also had kind of slightly more paranormal and kind of etheric stuff happening as well at the same time.
Oh, definitely, definitely. Yeah. Well, I noticed it mainly with my dogs. My
Yeah,
two dogs, they started acting really weird, and sometimes they'd stare at me or stare behind me.
yeah.
And and they're Bedlington Terriers. They're really nice dogs, and they don't ever get vicious or anything. I never hear them growling, but they started doing some very strange things. They'd back up into the corner, and they'd
Yeah.
be looking at something sort of invisible, and I felt very, very unsettled.
And this was
Just me.
also the time when you felt you were being watched. You felt there was something watching you, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That horrible. I had that horrible feeling inside, and I'd never had it before. And it was sheer sort of fear. And the only other time I felt that fear is when I something that I referred to when I did that interview with Ben, where I was walking down Live Alley in Oxford, and something to my left started walking parallel with me. So I stopped walking, and this thing carried on for a minute. So I started speeding up, and then this thing speeded up, and I stopped, and then I did like a hop and a jump, and this thing obviously didn't know I was going to stop, and it carried on, and then it sort of went like a horrible growl from about 20 foot to my left, and I basically
Wow.
turned around and ran home, and that
What
was
did it
just
look
on.
like? What
No,
did
I
it look?
didn't. I didn't say anything. No, no. Basically, I was walking down this thing called Live Alley, trying to get a shortcut through to Cowley because I was jamming with a band,
Yeah.
and I could have done the walk in 25 minutes. It cuts down through a thing called Live Alley, where you walk down a path, a nature reserve, and it's only about like a 20-minute walk. Then you go onto the golf course, but each side comes up, and it's really dark. And basically, I saw no one behind me, no one in front, but up on the bank, I suddenly was aware of something almost like walking alongside, trailing me, and I could hear it crunching. And it sounded like it was bipedal. And every time I stopped, it did an extra crunch, like it wasn't ready for me to stop. So I started speeding up, and that sped up. And I knew for a while that where this thing was walking, the path where I thought it was going to meet mine round the corner. And it was a really isolated, out of the way area. So I basically had the fight or flight, and I just turned around and ran back. And that really scared me. And that's the only other time I've really been scared, apart
Mm.
from when I've had these things with the entities coming in. But I don't know whether they were sort of, entities just looking over me, and they were good. But why would you feel that horrible fear? I think that
Mm.
it's there to warn us. I'm sure it's a primeval thing that we've got in us to warn us when there's a presence near that isn't good or hasn't got good intentions for us.
Yeah. This is the thing I'm saying, Neil, that when I had my instances of being watched myself, and it didn't feel like I was being watched by a being. It felt like it's really hard to describe. It felt like it was humans doing it, remote viewing me. It felt like there was somebody just observing what I was doing and where I was for whatever reason. And this was in tandem at the same time as things like the helicopters that kept coming, the phone calls, the flashing of the headlights, and all that shenanigans. So I swear there is some kind of human division, human military outfit somewhere that is in absolute cahoots with these beings or these entities working with them. I think that's exactly what's going on.
I believe that as well. I really do believe that. You know, I've got to be careful because a lot of my relatives are sort of most of my family have been in the RAF, you know, and in the services, and quite a few of them are serving at the moment. So I have to sort of, you know, watch some of the things I sort of say in
Oh,
regards
this
to
this
sort
will
of
be
things. But
nothing to do with them. Nothing to do with them at all. I do actually have a couple of friends in the US Air Force, and they have no clue whatsoever about any of this stuff. And I'm sure even at presidential level or prime minister level, they probably have no clue. They might have an inkling. There might be some kind of like need to know kind of offices of government, but I'm pretty sure they're blocked from finding out what's going on. And this goes back to, I think it was Eisenhower's warning about the military industrial complex getting out of control.
well, I think that's what's happened. You know, that is exactly what's happened. And I think that, you know, there's people out there making their own rules. There seems to be like a shadow government and or shadow organisation, which, you know, might even include the Vatican. I mean, you know, you've got to ask why they've got their telescope, Lucifer, you know, looking up in the infrared. I mean, what are they looking for? You know, I think it goes very far. I mean, I think there's a whole group of people that are um, bringing around about some agenda on Earth. And you've only got to listen to the people talking about underground bases. And the fact, you know, they get shut up all the time and even killed, like Phil Schneider. Now, many people laugh and say, "Oh, Phil Schneider, you know, bullshit." Da, 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 da. But I don't think, you know, here was a man that, you know, worked hard to get his own company together, and he got government. You know, he ended up working for the government, getting government contracts, and in the end, the guy ended up dying. You know, in a
It was
mysterious
a
circumstance.
it was a shootout, wasn't it? I think with Phil Schneider.
No, 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 no. He was found with a catheter, bit of catheter tubing round his neck. He was strangled. They said he
Oh,
committed suicide.
oh, yeah. Who was the guy that had the shootout with the sheriff's department?
I'm not sure about that actually. I don't
I
know
know
about
the
that
one
one.
you mean. I just can't remember his name though. But yeah, similar kind of guy though, wasn't it?
Yeah, pretty
Yeah,
much like a either UFO research or something of that nature.
Yeah, Phil Schneider was the one that helped dig sort of subterranean cave bases and things like that. Supposedly, for those that don't know, he was employed because of his skills in making underground bases and things. That's where they discovered Greys working with the military, and I think he was actually there was supposedly an underground battle with the Greys and the military, and he was actually shot and wounded, and a US serviceman who was there with him actually saved his life and basically pushed him up in the lift or whatever they used to get to the surface. But this other guy died, and so that he claimed that one of the injuries he got was from one of these underground battles with the Greys, apparently.
well, that's right. He was a government geologist, and basically he had some really good boring machines. He was doing all the boring, the tunnel boring. And apparently they broke the way into some kind of place underground, and apparently went straight into like some kind of base with the Greys. And about, he pulled his sidearm apparently to fire, and one of these beings apparently used some kind of a laser thing on him. It cut his fingers off, and it basically opened him up from his bottom of his neck right the way down his chest. And he was in hospital for ages. He had to have stitches. And apparently somebody pressed the lift, as you said, and sent him up. And yeah, I think it was in Dulce, or Dulce, whatever they call it, the underground base there. But you know, he's
That's
not the
right.
only person talking about this stuff either. So you know, it makes you wonder, and it all fits in with this agenda of, you know, it all goes back to the reptilian thing again.
Yeah, I mean, and also the fact is that you're one of the very few people photographing the stuff that we can't see, and a lot of these UFOs appear to have this ability to cloak themselves, and they just appear and disappear. I mean, our last guest was Colin Saunders, and we was talking about flying triangles, and he said it was there 1 second and gone the next, and it seems they have this technology that literally switches them into the invisible spectrum, but they're possibly still there, or they just zap off at super speed that they're in another part of the world with literally within a blink of the eye. But my suspicions are that they probably are there, and they reveal themselves when they want to be seen, and then they just go offline as such when they don't want to be seen. And I mean, if that's a technology you can harness, it's quite amazing that you could literally fly over your enemy country if you want to go that far, and literally spy on everybody, and they have no idea they're literally just above the rooftops. It's quite amazing.
Yeah, it certainly makes you think, doesn't it? I mean, it could be that, you know, they're interdimensional and they're able to just go between dimensions. I mean, they seem, you know, you hear about people who are being abducted. They seem to be able to influence our reality. And I've heard about people being levitated out the bed and through walls and things. So it makes you wonder what sort of technology they've got. But then again, if they are these creator gods, these fallen angel type people, then they're obviously going to have a lot of technologies that as humans haven't got, or maybe did have years ago and have lost. You only have to look back at all these massive cities that they find, all around the world in Central America and stuff, and the pyramids. I mean, some of it was going on years ago, and these beings came down, presented themselves as gods, and they said they'd return, and they haven't returned yet. So, are they in the process of returning? Is this what's happening?
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, we've drawn to a close now. We've actually reached the end of the show. So it's been a fascinating couple of hours talking about the quest for the Invisibles. So, Nick, we'd like to thank you very much for taking part with us. And can you direct people to your website once again and the title of your book so that they can track it down if they want?
Yeah. Well, the website is www.questfortheinvisibles, all one word, .co.uk. And my book is called Quest for the Invisibles, and it's available worldwide. If you go on Amazon, you'll have no problem finding it. It's available in Waterstones, various places. So yeah, just go on to Amazon, and I think there's a link to it on my website as well. So I'll repeat that again. It's www.questfortheinvisibles.co.uk, and there's also some footage I've got on the Quest for the Invisibles YouTube site. But if you just Google Quest for the Invisibles or Nik Hayes, you'll come up with you'll see it all.
And Nick,
Great.
Are you looking for people with their own stories to contact you? Do you kind of collate other people's similar stories?
Yeah, I get emails from all over the world. I've had a few people, it's one of the main reasons, the main motivations for me writing the book. Quite a few people saying, "Oh, you're going to write a book about this? We're really interested in it." And and we've got old camera gear that we want to get back out again. And so that was one of the things that made me write the book, just so that the book is just a guide to what happened to me over the first 5 years of recording in the infrared and ultraviolet, and it's just packed full of pictures. Showing the stuff that I caught and explanations of them. It talks all about, how you can, film this sort of stuff yourself as well. So it's all in there.
Great. That's brilliant. Well, thank you very, very much, Nick. And we wish you success with your future projects. And if you want to find out about Nick's stuff, go to his website and also track him down on YouTube as well. So we'll say thank you very much indeed for this another episode of the Paranormal Peep Show, which you can listen to again on Podbean, Stitcher and iTunes. And we wish you all a happy new year, and we'll catch you all next month. And it's good night from myself and good night from Andy.
And good night from me.
Thanks, Neil.
And good night from Nick as well. Cheers all.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.